Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We greet you once again from the EBS studio for necessary dialogues. Dr. Geoffrey West is the Shannon Distinguished Professor and former President of the Santa Fe Institute and the Associate Senior Fellow of Oxford University's Green Templeton College. Prior to joining the Santa Fe Institute as a distinguished professor in 2003, he was the leader and founder of the High Energy Physics Group at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. He's a theoretical physicist whose primary interests have been in fundamental questions ranging across physics, biology, and the social sciences. He's the author of the best-selling book Scale the Universal Laws of Growth, Innovation, Sustenability, and the Peace of Life in Organisms, Cities, Economies, and Companies. Time magazine has called him one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Geoffrey West has lectured at many high-profile events worldwide, including TED and Davos. And now, he is the special guest of Matthias Corvinus Collegium, Cluj-Napoca, at a new event in the Transylvania Lectures series. This is also the reason for his presence in Romania. Ladies and gentlemen, present in the EBS studio at this moment is Dr. Geoffrey West. Thank you for accepting our invitation. We are honored by your presence. Welcome.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm delighted to be having this conversation.
So, Scale is a captivating scientific story about the fundamental natural laws that connect us in a simple yet profound way. I mentioned that your work is motivated by the search for unifying principle and the simplicity underlying complexity. And what makes you discover so important is that you found this formula that unites several complex and diverse phenomena of living system, including our bodies, our cities, and our business. And I understand that the basis of your research is this Kleber's law. So, to be better understanding how you arrived at the law we know today from the basic idea, could you start by telling us what Kleber's law entails? What is the story of this formula? What does it mean?
Yes, well, that's a very big question. So Kleber's law is a law that was discovered by a man named Max Kleber in about 1932, maybe 1933. He was a Swiss immigrant to California, and what he discovered was something sort of amazing, that he measured, and he also took data from other people, of metabolic rate for various animals. Metabolic rate simply means how much energy or how much food each animal requires each day to stay alive. And he plotted those measurements logarithmically, which means instead of plotting it, 1, 2, 3, 4, it was 1, 10, 100, 1,000. So you could get a mouse and an elephant on the same piece of paper, so to speak. And what he discovered when he did that was that all the points representing the metabolic rates versus the weight of the animal lined up on a very simple straight line. And it was kind of amazing because we have this idea, we believe that all of these organisms and all of their organs, their cells, their genes, all evolved by evolution by natural selection, so that they're historically contingent. They depend upon their history and their previous environments and so on. So you might have expected, when you looked at a plot like that, like Kleber did, that the points would lie not maybe randomly, but they'd be spread all over the graph all over the piece of paper. Instead, they're lining up in this very systematic way. And so it was sort of, in a way, in violation of one's naive idea about natural selection being sort of arbitrary and capricious and totally historically contingent. So the other thing about this discovery was that the slope of the line was very close to the number 3/4, 0.75. And it was that became known as Kleiber's law, the fact that this the metabolic rate, to put it in slightly technical language, scales as the 3/4 power of the body mass of the animal. And so following that, many measurements were done over the next 20 years, 30 years of all physiological quantities, things like, the length of aortas, lifespan, how long it takes to mature, how many offspring. So anything that you could measure about organisms, about their physiology or about their life history, and these were measured and then plotted in the same way, namely in this logarithmic fashion. And what it was discovered was that all of them have this straight line behavior. So somehow underlying the extraordinary diversity and complexity of life, maybe the most complex phenomenon in the universe, lay this extraordinary simplicity that were revealed by these scaling laws. And not only that, I said that Kleiber's law had this slope, the line had the slope of 3/4. When you plotted any of these quantities, and I could name probably 50 of them, they all had slopes that were simple multiples of 1/4. And so the number 4 was somehow this number that was the magic number of biology, of life, the magic number of life itself. And that sort of remained a mystery for a long time. And I got very interested in it in the 1990s. And with some biologists, we claimed to have understood its origins. And that's how I got involved in this story.
I understand. And how do the scaling laws apply in the context of cities, according to
Yes, so
Geoffrey
let me
West's
just say one word about the work that we did to understand the origin of these scaling laws, because that is the segue to understanding the extension to cities. So what we realized, or what I certainly realized, was that the thing that unites all of these organisms, because this Kleiber's law applied from at the cellular level all the way up through organisms to the ecosystem level. So the whole spectrum of the biosphere. And what we realized was common to all of them was that all of them have this challenge of having an enormous number of customers, so to speak, cells, and they have to be supplied by energy and information. And of course, the way we do it is by networks. We have all, our circulatory system, our respiratory system, and so on. And so the origin of these laws, it turns out, lies in the mathematics and physics of these networks. And indeed, when you do all that, and that was the work that I did, was to show that this number 4, this 1/4, evolves naturally from the mathematics and the physics. And so having done that, it's very natural then to think about cities. Are cities just kind of some super organism that satisfies a similar law? And of course, again, because they're network systems, they have much in common with organisms. Just the roads outside, looking out of the window, the roads and the electrical lines and the water lines, gas lines are sort of like our circulatory and respiratory systems. And so it was natural to ask whether cities also scale. So in biology, one way of looking at the scaling laws is to say, despite appearances, the whale, the giraffe, the elephant, the human being, And the mouse, despite the differences, the fact that the whale lives in the ocean, the giraffe has a long neck, the elephant has a trunk, we walk on two legs, and the mouse scurries around, we're actually, to a good approximation, sort of 90%, 90% approximation, scaled versions of one another, in a non-linear fashion, but we are actually scaled versions of one another in terms of anything you can measure about us. So the question then is, are cities scaled versions of one another? Now, I don't know enough about Romanian cities, so I'll use American cities. So the question is New York a scaled up version of Los Angeles, which is a scaled version of Chicago, which is a scaled version of Santa Fe, which is where I live, despite the fact that they're in different geographies, they even have different cultures, their climates are different, they look quite different, but are they in fact just scaled versions of one another? And what is the law that connects them? And would it be the same as in biology that we plotted their characteristics logarithmically, that is, again, going up at 1, 10, 100, and so on, versus their size being, say, their population, would we see straight lines? And so what we did was we discovered that when you look at the metrics of a city, everything from the length of the roads to the number of buildings and so on and so forth, it looks just like an organism, except for one major thing, that instead of the slope being 0.75, the slope was 0.85. Otherwise, they look quite similar. But the one new thing we discovered about cities was that there's a new thing in cities, and that's what we're doing here. Social interaction, social networks, and all the wonders of socioeconomic life. And so when we looked at those, we discovered something different than biology. And that is that they still had straight lines when you plotted things like amount of crime, amount of disease, the wages, the number of patents, number of ideas being created, number of schools, anything that you could measure. They all, again, showed straight lines, but the slopes, instead of being less than 1, 0.75 or 0.85, were bigger than 1. And the difference being that instead of the bigger you are, the less per capita, in a city, the bigger you are, the more you have per capita, the higher the wages, the bigger the city, the more crime, the bigger the city per capita, the more disease per capita, but the more ideas per capita and the more interactions per capita. So it was quite similar, except for this hugely new piece, which was to do with our socioeconomic activity.
I understand. And let me ask you, can some cities or communities prevent potential collapse using your calculation formula?
Yeah, in principle, yes. Because the history of urban design, urban planning, urban mitigation, meaning repair and so on, urban development, has been fraught with problems. I mean, it's classic that after new areas are developed, almost, within a very short time, all kinds of problems develop. And cities are always facing problems of, their economic activity and being competitive and so on. And so in the sense, in order to answer your question, I think you have to think that in the sense that understanding the dynamic that has led to the functioning of a city, therefore these scaling laws and the fact that they depend upon the networks that are operating in cities, both the physical networks like roads, transport, electrical lines, but also the social networks, the way people are interacting, and therefore meaning the role the city plays in providing venues, places to bring people together, to interact, to create ideas, to create wealth, and so on, are crucial. So, and how to do that, how to facilitate that, is really in the big picture, and long-term crucial for the health, well-being, success, and growth of a city. Because a city, the only reason for all these buildings, for everything in the city, the only reason is to bring people together, to interact, is to facilitate social interaction. The city isn't here for the buildings. The buildings are here to facilitate us, and we forget that sometimes. I mean, because most people, when you think of city, you think of the buildings. If I say Paris to you, you think of the Eiffel Tower and the Arc de Triomphe, and New York, you think of the skyscrapers. But, you know, that really isn't the city. The city is the people, because that is the mechanism for creating even greater interaction, to create greater wealth and ideas, to increase standards and quality of life.
I understand. How do the scaling laws in companies differ from those in biologies and the cities?
Yes, that's a very good question. They're sort of in between. We examined the scaling laws for companies. I should have said, needless to say, when I was talking about biology, life, of course, we look at life across the entire spectrum of life. And for cities, we had data worldwide. What I told you wasn't just for, say, American cities, but it was what we discovered, across the globe. The same scaling occurs in the United States as it does in South America, as it does in Asia, China, Japan, and so on. I don't know. Presumably it does in Romania. I don't know. Companies, unfortunately, all we had was the kind of data we needed was American data. So what I'm going to tell you about companies is from the United States, and it's based on data of publicly traded companies, and in fact, all publicly traded companies since 1950. So that's the data set, so to speak. And we discovered they do scale. That is, if you look at, if you take the size of the company to be their total assets, that's the size of a company, and the metric to be sales, profits, and so forth. Then we discovered that, remarkably, they scale sublinearly, meaning a bit more like biology, where the slopes were less than 1 rather than greater than 1. Superlinearly is what we called it, greater than 1. And so, therefore, naively at least, you would expect companies, therefore, to behave more like organisms, which means, which we haven't talked about, but what it means is that sublinear behavior leads to growth that starts quickly and then stops, like you and I did. We grew quickly and then we stopped. And the theory explains that. And so this sort of, it's the same thing for companies, except the one addition being that when we say stops growing relative to the overall market. So the market, of course, is expanding and companies are going on with it. And what we discovered, what we'd learned, what the theory said was that companies will, typically, successful companies will exceed the market, and you think you're doing great, but the market will eventually catch up and overtake. And so companies behave like organisms. They grow quickly relative to the market, and then collapse. They die because they can't keep up with the market. And so, like us, they're sort of doomed eventually to die. And we looked at the data, and in fact, what you discover is that if you're a U.S. publicly traded company, you can only expect to survive about 10 years. After about 10 years, if you exceed 10 years, you're doing well. And most companies are gone by, 20 or 30 years. And of course, there are exceptions to that, which we're very familiar with. But the vast majority disappear. And that's in marked contrast to cities because of this superlinear behavior coming from social networks, which lead to open-ended growth.
I understand. Published in 2017, the book scaled the universal law of growth, innovation, sustainability, and the peace of life in organisms, cities, economies, and companies offers an innovative look at how scaling principles influence various fields, from biology to economics and urban planning. In fact, scale is considered a fundamental work that offers new insights into complexity, being appreciated both in academic circles and among a wider audience interested in science and urban development. I would like to ask if there is another project in the works. What's next for your works?
Very good. So the thing I have become most interested in, even though I don't spend as much time on it, and as much time as it deserves, is taking this framework to the entire planet. So what you just said, I started out with organisms, biology, extended that to cities and then companies, and it's very natural then to ask, can you think of the entire globe, the whole entire planet in this way? Because the important thing in terms of the theoretical, conceptual framework is that these scaling laws are derivable mathematically from which is what I said earlier, from the networks, the various networks that are underlying the distribution of energy, resources, and information in these systems. And they're very easy to identify in organisms, cities, and companies. But until recently, there really wasn't a global network in the usual sense. I mean, countries were quite disconnected. But, I've come from the United States here to Cluj in Romania. But, roughly speaking, it's the same. I mean, we're doing the same thing we could be doing in Pittsburgh or in, anywhere. I mean, in India, we could be doing this, and we're listening to similar music and so on. So the point being that the globe now, as we all recognize, is quite interconnected, and there is this sense of a global network, and that we're all interrelated necessarily with each other and therefore dependent on each other. So given that, the question, does the planet itself, as it expands in terms of its population, follow scaling laws? And that's work we've recently done, and the answer is, roughly speaking, yes, it does. It behaves as if it's one thing, one super-duper organism, so to speak. And so the question is, what can we learn about that, about the sustainability of the system? That is it like an organism that it's going to grow quickly, which it's been doing certainly since the Industrial Revolution, and then fade away, stop growing, and then die? Or is it going to be open-ended? Can we go on the way we're doing, just expanding exponentially? And the work so far, and the work is certainly still very much in progress, indicates that it's impossible to continue in exactly this way, that we are going to have to make some serious changes very quickly if we're going to sustain the kind of quality and standard of living to which we all enjoy and aspire to, and which we would like everybody across the globe to participate in. So this is really what is interesting me most. I mean, I work on many different things that are associated with this, but this is the one that I think is most important and the most difficult and most challenging.
Since when, at what age did your desire to find answers to questions like, what is life? What do we age? What do we die? And so began. And when did you decide, it's clear, this is what I want to do in life. This is my path.
Oh, wow. I don't think there was a single moment, so to speak. It was a process, which it probably is for everybody, but I probably, like many, inquisitive children, even as a child, I was very interested, of course, in some of the questions. What are the heavens? What is death? Even when my grandfather died, I didn't know what meaning to give to that when I was a boy. So that kind of thing already stimulated what are really big questions and almost unanswerable questions. Leading to, quote, what is the meaning of life? What's the point of all this? And what I found was that, I had a religious upbringing, but that was very not satisfying. It didn't answer, and especially it didn't answer when I was taught mathematics and the power of science, and that opened up a lot, and that's why. And I was very good at mathematics, it turns out. So that led me to becoming a physicist, and that seemed to be one of the few human endeavors that provided answers. But of course, in a certain sense, in a limited way. In one way, on the other hand, physics has been extraordinary. I mean, we understand the origin and evolution of the universe, roughly speaking, from the Big Bang. I mean, all the way through to the formation of galaxies, the solar system, the structure of the planet, and so on. I mean, it's kind of amazing. And in fact, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing without any of that being developed, the fundamental laws of physics. So that is extraordinary. So, but it wasn't until maybe, the 90s, which I mentioned earlier, that I started to get interested and realize much more viscerally, much more sort of inside me, that just staying within the physical world does not provide the answer to the really big question. I mean, a big question is, of course, the role of the heavens. That has been answered by physics, by science, and the origins of the universe to a large degree have. But by beginning to realize that something quite extraordinary, that we understand more about the origins and evolution of the universe than we do about the messiness that exists on the planet. The messiness being us and all the fantastic things that are on this planet, life itself. And that's what I got interested in. And that's what got me interested in these scaling laws, because they were a way for a physicist to start thinking about these very questions. And and now, the big question about the sustainability of the planet. But every once in a while, I go back to this kind of childhood question of, quote, the meaning of life and the, what's the point? What's the point of all of this? It seems, religion gives it to us. I mean, if you believe in God, that's an answer. But for me, it's a very unsatisfactory answer. It doesn't explain anything, really, to me. So I think, now I go into a whole different dimension here. So I've sort of concluded the only two things that matter in life, really, are love, something that we do, and the recognition that the rest of the universe and the rest of the biosphere, the plants, the trees, the animals, actually don't care. I mean, they don't care that, it's not their fault. They don't care that people are being killed next door in Ukraine or in Syria or in Gaza or whatever. We care. I mean, we do it. We do terrible things, but we also care. And so we are the force of morals and ethics for the universe. I mean, nowhere else cares. The stars don't care. The planets don't care, but we care. And so that gives meaning. So one speculation is we are the universe's way of knowing itself, of learning how, so understanding and love come together, morality, ethical behavior, and so on. So otherwise it is pointless.
Have you ever had a moment when you said, oh, that's it, this is too much?
You mean personally?
Yes.
Is it too much? You mean in terms of working and...
About your working?
That's a... Well, I'm 83 years old, and I do sometimes think, maybe, but I'm still driven, if you like, and fascinated by all these questions. So no, the only too much is about the tragedies that are going on the planet, and that after, 400 years of science and 200 years of the Enlightenment, that we still, in many ways, live in a dark age, and that's very sad. And then it's easy to feel cynical and despondent when you see all the things happening, and that somehow we can't, do what many. I mean, that's where religion does come in. I mean, charismatic leaders like, Jesus or Muhammad or Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela, to bring people together, that love should be the dominant thing and not hate and revenge and all those kinds of things.
We know that it happens, and it's normal for it to happen. At the beginning of any journey, you need support. Family, friends,
yes.
Teachers. For you, who played an important role, who encouraged you and was there for you at the beginning of your journey?
Oh, goodness. Well, yes, that's interesting. I came from a poor family, a family was not educated. I was thinking the other day, I think of my 4 grandparents, only one could read and write, and my mother left school at 13 and my father at 15. But they believed in education and they supported me, even if they didn't understand what it was I was going to. I mean, they supported me, I think, almost certainly because they thought I would get a better job. Not because of intellectual pursuits, although maybe my father did a little bit. So I did feel... So I think the important point is I wasn't discouraged, and I was mostly encouraged without... unconditionally, if you see what I mean. I mean, it wasn't... there was never pressure to do something else. Go get a job now. Why are you going on to get a doctorate? Why are you leaving and going to America to further your education? Why don't you get it? There was none of that whatsoever. And so I think in that sense, I always felt very supported. And then I was very fortunate. I had some very good teachers along the way, both in high school, some very inspirational teachers in high school, and then in college. So I was very fortunate in that respect.
Maybe from the perspective of your research, or perhaps out of pure curiosity, for a few days visit, for a vacation, why not? Have you ever had the opportunity to visit Romania until now?
No, this is my first visit to Romania, and specifically to Transylvania. I was telling the young lady that brought us in the car this morning that although I've not been to Romania, I have been in this part of the world in the sense that I realized I've been in Bulgaria, and I've been in Hungary, and I've been in Serbia, but a very long time, well, especially Bulgaria. Oh. I was in Bulgaria in 1959, when it was a very different place.
Yes.
And I know it's different. Romania is different from all those places, of course, but nevertheless, this sort of part of the world, the Central European part of the world, which has always fascinated me, by the way. I've always wanted to. When I got the invitation to come here, I was very intrigued and excited. I mean, part of it because of this history of that I was very interested in it, although I didn't know it very well. But also, of course, because of this boyish thing about, the image of Dracula and
Oh, yeah.
It's very silly. But so I'm delighted to have come.
Well, I hope the translation is correct so you can perfectly understand the message. Well, it's just a joke. And it goes like this. In Romania, very interesting things always happen. Because what should happen never does. So, it can always be a subject of a study. And maybe we'll learn some new and interesting things about Romanians. So, what fascinated you most when you hear about Romania? What do you like to visit?
I think the first thing that fascinated me about Romania, which is, none of this is very original. I remember I first came conscious of Romania probably when I was 18, maybe, anyway, sort of young man. And by accident, I picked up a Romanian book. I mean,
Wow.
I don't know, it was just, I don't know why it was there. And I didn't know what it was. I opened up a book anyway, and I thought, this is weird. This looks like some weird form of Latin, because I knew Latin then. Now I don't remember any Latin, but I knew Latin then, and I would read. I could sort of read. I mean, vaguely understand what it was, except it had all these U's at the end of the. But I could sort of vaguely read it, and then I discovered it was Romanian, and that really shocked me because, of course, I thought of Romanian as Slavic, and therefore the language would be like Russian or whatever. So that first fascinated me, and so on. And but then I've known actually a couple of very famous physicists have Romanian roots that I've known, more senior to me, very famous. And I was intrigued by that. And they were mostly, in fact, one of the things I wanted to do when I was here was originally, when I was thinking one day I'll go to Romania, I would like to visit a city called Chernovitz, which is not in Romania, but it used to be in Romania.
Oh, yeah.
It's in Ukraine now.
Yes.
And the reason is that there are a couple of very famous physicists, and one of whom I knew very well, got Nobel Prizes, whose families came from Chernovitz. They were Jewish families that came from Chernovitz. And I looked up Chernovitz, and there was this list of very famous people, not just the physicists, and I thought that would be interesting. I would like to, what is it about this small town that produced all these people? So that was another thing. So I'm sort of intrigued as to, people I've known that have come from this area in general.
Dr. Geoffrey West, it was a great pleasure and an honor to have you with us. Thank you very much for your time. Good luck and have a nice day.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I enjoyed your questions and our little discussion. Thank you very much.
EBS Radio.